The last harvest at Lantern Row Vineyard. Some places don't become haunted overnight. Sometimes it takes decades, sometimes it takes generations, and sometimes, according to locals on the North Fork of Long Island, all it takes is one bad season. The story of Lantern Row Vineyard officially begins in 1974. At least that's what the brochures say. Family-owned, handcrafted wines, quiet coastal charm. The kind of place tourists visit in the fall to drink red wine beside fire pits, while acoustic music drifts through the vines. But if you ask older locals about the property, most of them don't talk about wine at all. They talk about the fog. Because every October, usually during the final week of harvest, a strange fog rolls through the vineyard after midnight. Not normal fog. This one moves differently. People say it stays low to the ground, like it's searching for something. And if you stand inside it long enough, you start hearing things. At first, the owners dismissed the stories as local folklore designed to attract tourists. That changed in 1998. That was the year a seasonal worker named Daniel Mercer disappeared during harvest cleanup. Daniel was 23 years old, college student, no history of mental illness, no criminal record. According to reports, he was last seen walking alone through the eastern vine rows shortly after midnight, carrying a flashlight and a portable radio. When he didn't return, co-workers assumed he had gone home early. But the next morning, his truck was still parked outside the vineyard, keys inside, wallet untouched, driver, side door hanging open. Police searched the entire property. Nothing, no footprints, no blood, no signs of struggle, just the radio, still sitting in the dirt between the vines, playing static. The case slowly faded from public attention over the years, another missing person story, another cold file, until somebody discovered the photographs. Retired Suffolk County Detective Alan Dorsey first saw them in 2019. The pictures had been stored inside an old evidence box connected to the Mercer investigation. Most were normal, harvest equipment, search teams, wide shots of the vineyard. Then there was the final image, a blurry photograph taken near the eastern rows around 2:00 a.m. At first glance, it looked empty, but after zooming in, investigators noticed something standing deep between the vines. Not clearly visible, just a shape, tall, thin, human enough to feel wrong, and behind it several faint lights like lanterns. Dorsey reportedly became obsessed with the image. He spent months re-examining the original investigation and interviewing former vineyard employees. What he found only made the story stranger. 3 former workers independently described hearing music late at night during harvest season. Not modern music, older music, slow jazz, big band, sometimes distant piano. One former employee claimed she heard laughter moving through the fog beside her while working security near the storage barn. Another said he saw lights drifting between the rows after closing time. Lantern lights moving slowly through the vineyard despite nobody being there. But the strangest account came from a former groundskeeper named Walter Pierce. Walter worked at Lantern Row Vineyard for nearly 17 years before abruptly quitting. When Dorsey interviewed him, Walter admitted there was one section of the property workers quietly avoided after dark, the eastern rows, especially row 8. According to Walter, the soil there was different, softer, colder, like the ground never fully dried. He also claimed that every few years, pieces of old objects surfaced after heavy rain. Buttons, shoes, fragments of watches, things that looked much older than the vineyard itself. Dorsey eventually uncovered an old survey map from the 20th century. Long before Lantern Row Vineyard existed, the eastern side of the property had once been marked as restricted land connected to an emergency quarantine camp built during a coastal illness outbreak decades earlier. Records from the period were incomplete, but historians believe travelers arriving by ferry from the city were temporarily housed there after several became seriously sick during the late 18th century. Some reportedly died before transport could arrive. The official number was never confirmed. Over time, the land was abandoned, then eventually purchased and converted into vineyard property generations later. Most people would probably dismiss all of this as coincidence, urban legends layered onto local history. Detective Dorsey didn't. In October of 2021, he visited Lantern Row Vineyard himself during the final week of harvest. He arrived shortly before midnight. According to his notes, the vineyard was quiet except for wind moving through the vines and music coming faintly from a wedding venue nearly half a mile away. At 12:47 a.m., the fog appeared. Dorsey described it as rolling in unnaturally fast. Within minutes, visibility dropped to almost nothing. That's when he heard the music, soft piano, somewhere deeper in the rows. He initially assumed another person was nearby. Then he noticed something strange. The music wasn't echoing through the air. It sounded below him, as if it were coming from underneath the ground itself. Dorsey continued walking toward the eastern rows, row 6, row 7, then row 8. That was where he stopped writing. His final voice recording was recovered from his phone the next morning. The audio begins with footsteps moving through wet soil, heavy breathing, wind, then silence. After several seconds, Dorsey whispers something quietly. "There are people out here." A few seconds later, the recording captures distant music, slow piano, almost impossible to hear. Then another sound emerges beneath it, voices soft, calm, dozens of them, as if an entire crowd were speaking somewhere underground. Dorsey begins breathing harder, the recording crackles sharply, then he says one final sentence. "They're carrying lanterns." The audio cuts out immediately after that. Detective Alan Dorsey was found the following morning sitting beside row 8, alive but disoriented. According to reports, he could not explain what happened during the missing hours between midnight and sunrise. He officially retired 6 months later. He has never publicly discussed the incident. Lantern Row Vineyard still operates today. Tourists still visit every fall. Wine tastings continue, weddings continue, harvest festivals continue. Most visitors never notice anything unusual, but employees still talk quietly about the fog, especially during late October. Some claim they hear music after midnight, drifting through the vines. Others report seeing faint lights, moving slowly between the rows, long after closing time. The vineyard owners deny all of it. Officially, there is no mystery, no disappearances connected to the property, no buried history, no unexplained events, just stories, local legends. But every year, during the final harvest, workers still avoid row 8 after dark, and according to locals, if the fog ever rolls in completely silent, you leave the vineyard immediately, because if you hear the lanterns before you see them, you're already too late.